Welcome to Talk to Me with Life Coach Natasha. My name is Natasha Sherman and I am your host. The subject of today's show is occurs as a very taboo subject. It's the subject of money and how much money we earn as individuals. And even more taboo than that, it's the subject of compulsive under-earning. So much of our identity is tied into not only what we do to earn our money, but most definitely in how much we make at doing what we do. We're more willing to admit that we're doing a job that we don't much like, but as long as we're making a lot of money at it, it occurs as much more desirable. So why would we want to admit that we were compulsive under-earners? It seems to me that people would rather publicly talk about the more intimate details of their sex lives than to talk about being a compulsive under-earner. And yet as a coach, my experience shows that nothing powerfully alters or shifts unless we can talk about the way it is at any given moment. So my guest today is Jim Roi. He is a philosopher and healer. He's been a guest before and he was such a great guest. We invited him back to talk about a subject that he has a lot of passion for, and that's the subject of compulsive under-earning. So welcome, Jim.
Hi, it's great to be here again. Great to be back.
Thank you for coming. So this is a subject that you have a lot of commitment to, and you and I have talked about this, and it occurs as kind of the subject we don't want to even entertain talking about as it pertains to us, possibly. So why is it something that you think is something we should be talking about?
Yeah. Well, if I just put it in terms of hitting the nail on the head, I would say this is the conversation. This conversation has a great future, even though it's hardly begun, because the things we cannot talk about are the things that kill us, that we're most blinded to. And our inability to speak openly, with ourselves even, with our relationships, our spouses, forget with our accountants and our, tax, this is, as you said, probably the most taboo and probably a conversation that conceals more human pain and suffering than any other. So, and you picked up on my passion for it, which anyone might guess is that deals with things in any way like this. I have a personal investment. So I just want to say to the viewers, you may not be able to hear this at all, and you may be able to hear this like, well, maybe it'll be interesting, and I just want to say, if this might seem to have nothing to do with you, but like you might be kind of interested, that's a fine way to listen, because any way we can begin to enter this conversation is going to be beneficial.
So I'm going to interrupt you just for a second, because I agree with you, but why is it a subject we need to talk about? Like, I understand that, what is concealed is what causes suffering, but people sort of manage in their lives, and they manage without divulging this very personal information. So what is there that's important to listen to?
Yeah, and first of all, I wouldn't say anyone needs to divulge any of this especially not with anyone that wouldn't understand. So this is a great kind of maybe a tightly held conversation. This isn't let's go public or something. It's a little like very much on the model of the alcoholics. They created an anonymous program because people couldn't understand them anyways. They could hardly understand themselves. So especially initially, and it's proven to have immense essential benefit, that you don't have to talk openly, but that you can find someone to talk with, that you can at least begin to talk with yourself, and begin to examine, because the only reason anyone's going to take this on is because they're suffering immensely. I don't expect anyone's going to take this on out of simple curiosity or anything of the sort. People are going to take this on because they're suffering. And I'm convinced there's a huge audience for this. as I've been able to like deal with my own issues, people have like started coming out of the woodwork. People are dying to talk about this, but they don't want to be laughed at. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to be riveted. Like, what does that mean? You know, and I don't want to say it because I don't want to make it true. All of these, you know, things that we all fear. So I just want to say, look, I'll go first. In fact, I'll tell, you know, my story a little. I mean, I discovered this. I grew up very poor, a family of 9 kids up on the coast of Maine, and my father had no education. And we were poor, and there was a lot of insanity about money, kind of profound insanity. You know, my father used to take my money, and you know, he said when I was old enough to have my own bank account, we'd put it in the bank. I mean, he was an alcoholic, and the money never ended up in the bank, and we didn't talk about it. You know, so like I come by my passion very honestly, but I thought when I left home, I grew up in the 60s, and you know, when I left home when I was 17, I thought I left it behind, and I had a lot of evidence for that because I had no money issues for the, you know, until.
So explain that. When you say I had no money issues,
yeah,
did it mean you were earning a lot, you were
not,
comfortable?
Not a lot, not a little. I always had enough money. So I left home, I was a hippie. Didn't need a lot of money. I got through being a hippie, you know, I always was good at working and taking care of myself, you know. I worked my way through school. I saved up the money to go to graduate school. I was actually very successful. And then I met the woman who would become my wife. And nothing was very certain at first, but I began being anxious about money and nervous and didn't exactly want to talk about it. And we kind of struggled through for a while. I'd say, you know, we used to do all kinds of things that we didn't even realize. Like I used to spend money without telling her. She used to save money without telling me, you know.
Sounds like a good match.
Yeah, we sort of like cancel each other out. So, you know, we might have gotten by for a long time until she got pregnant. And with our first child. And when she became pregnant, I became frozen. And
Say more about that. What does that mean? When she became pregnant, you became frozen.
Well, so the obvious thing, I mean, you know, I loved her. I wanted to be a father. You know, we knew we were in love and wanted to have a family. We'd been trying for a long time to have a family. So it was a triumph that she got pregnant. But what happened for me when I say I got frozen is I stopped doing anything that would lead to money. And I mean, it wasn't that difficult. What I had to do, I was a consultant living in Manhattan. I worked for myself. I just needed to pick up the phone and dial some numbers.
Now, so you were already making money and you were already managing, and life was working, and now your wife is pregnant. Now, this seems to be like a pivotal moment. So did you stop working the way you had been working, not move forward, or just suddenly get frozen and become somewhat immobilized financially?
I suddenly became frozen, and I would look at the telephone and I would think of all the things I could do and should do and knew to do and knew they would work. And I didn't do them. And I mean that. It's like, if you hear what I'm saying, it's kind of like confessing a sort of insanity. Though I've discovered since then I'm not exactly unique about this. But I'm saying I'll present mine here. I'd look at the telephone. I knew, so here's one of the things you can hear in what I'm saying. It was not an intellectual issue. It's not that I didn't know what to do.
Right.
And it wasn't a physical issue, like I couldn't do it. What's not to do about dialing numbers? So something much deeper was engaged here. And I'll kind of just put it forth now. It was looking back, I can say, yeah, it was my own profound, deep belief system that providing for a family is a burden and a struggle for the man. So I was having a family, so it was time to struggle with the burden. And I did everything perfectly from that perspective.
Struggling, you mean?
Yeah, you know, we say you always win the game you're playing. So if I was playing the game of struggling with the burden of providing for a family, which I'd seen my father do, and my wife had seen her father do, so it didn't seem strange to either of us. Except it was clearly not going to work because my struggle was, you know, I was totally ineffective. So I had to start looking deeper than what do I know, and deeper than what can I do, and look into, and happily for me, I'm a philosopher, so I could look at, who am I being here? Who am I being? And since I'd been working with models of how do human beings generate their life, well, they believe stuff. And to believe stuff is like sort of like when we say we have a will. Our will is really our ability to care about stuff. And truth is, we care about strange things. So if I say I was willing to believe that providing for a family was going to be a burden and a struggle for me, and it was horrible, and I was so ashamed and so afraid, and I couldn't tell anyone, I couldn't talk to anyone. My wife and I kind of grappled with it, and I finally started using a 12-step program so that I could talk about it.
So this was a 12-step program specifically designed around financial issues, or?
Yes, it's financial issues. I'm not even going to just say which program it is, just because it's an anonymous program. But I mean, there was no program for compulsive under-earners in those days. It was almost like a plight worse than death, worse than being an out. Nobody wanted to be that.
So, you're someone who had a lot of insight, and as you say, you're always in a philosophical inquiry and being trained. So you see yourself frozen, a baby is imminent, a family is imminent.
A belly's getting bigger.
Right. And how long a process was this before you got to see that there was a setup here, that somehow you had a pre-designed image of being a provider involves struggle and suffering.
Yeah.
And then we live into our self-fulfilling prophecies, so we do that well. As you say, you win at the game you're playing.
Yeah. I mean, so as my wife got pregnant and her belly grew, and I began noticing I am simply not doing things that I know how to do. Probably a few months to confront that, you know what? I'm likely to not do them.
Wow.
And I remember when a friend said to me, like, usually I'm a very happy person. When I'm not on, sort of, people pick up on it. So a very close friend just looked at me. She said, what is it, Jim? What's your private nightmare? Mm. And for the first time in my life, I actually said it to someone. I said, poverty. And, my expectation in that moment is that life should disappear right now. I should simply be, my vote is canceled, I should die. But it wasn't.
So when you say I should die, that's a little confusing.
That inside myself, this was the unutterable truth.
That you would die in poverty, or you would cause?
That having admitted this, life was not worth living anyways.
Right.
Right? So this was, I would say, rather die.
This was the ultimate confession.
Yeah. This was like, this was exactly what I never wanted to have to deal with. Exactly. Right. Precisely.
Right.
Like a worse dream come true. And, but the strange truth, as people find, is like when you admit something like that, you don't die. Or maybe something dies, maybe the ego kind of dies a certain death, though it seems able to come back and die again. But I found I began to be able to talk and to become bigger than my fear and to examine the structure, the structure of my childhood and all the unlived, painful incidents and moments, and most profoundly, simply the rules, the way I seem to be constituted, so that these issues are not accidental. It's kind of a joke. When I met my wife, she was already engaged to a multimillionaire.
Wow.
But see, I mean, when you begin seeing, that's why this is a very powerful perspective to look at human ways of being and doing. As she couldn't have fulfilled her, say,
poverty
belief
story.
system. Yeah.
Of struggle.
And he was a wonderful guy. I knew the guy. He's a great guy. But but as we began to be able to talk about this, and it wasn't an instant, oh, now I got it, now I'm healed, but there was a kind of an excitement, for me especially, as a husband and a father and in danger of not providing, I was terrified. but as a philosopher and as like, wow, something's going on here. And a kind of a freedom emerging for me. So I was very excited. And I could go in a minute from being, oh my God, to, oh my God. And
I just want to say something about what you're talking about, because it's very powerful. Because what I hear you saying is that there was something undistinguished.
Yes.
And you found yourself behaving in a particular way that was going to lead you down some very dark path with no cheese at the end of it. And because of being confronted, you went into this inquiry and you uncovered something. And I think that's the value of talking about this subject, is the whole concept of, unless you uncover it, distinguish it, and bring it to the light, it's always there running the show, and you don't have access to it. But now all of a sudden, once you could distinguish it and actually fess up and own it, you could suddenly, it's not that it went away, the challenge was still make money, provide for family, but you could actually see that there was room to even be excited by it, because there's now some freedom to operate in a new context.
Yeah, the issue itself became legitimate. And that's why I say we could do nothing but begin to even present that it could be legitimate. So one of my closest friends at the time, an old friend who used to be a hippie, a girlfriend, we were hippies together. And she was on welfare. She came from a very wealthy family. She was on welfare. I'm going through my thing, but we began talking. And she was a sober alcoholic, and we'd run this analogy. Say, okay, I got it. If you're an alcoholic, that's the way we began framing it. So if you're an alcoholic, that means if you drink, you're going to be miserable. And you don't have to drink. Now that's what makes a difference for the alcoholic. First of all, they don't want to admit it, but once they do, then they really see, if I drink, I'll be miserable. But then they hear, and you don't have to drink a day at a time. That's news. People can hardly imagine how strange that sounds to an active alcoholic. But all of a sudden they realize they don't have to, and they don't. So I'm saying, okay, all right, so if that's how it goes, then, so if I say I'm a compulsive under-earner, that means if I under-earn, I'm going to be miserable. That part I had it done. That was clear as a bell. There was definitely a misery here. And if something didn't turn around, there was going to be more misery. So I'm a compulsive under-earner. Means if I do that, there will be misery. And then I ran the analogy. And I said, and I don't have to under-earn a day at a time.
Wow.
But now, I couldn't hear that. But I had but that's exactly what the alcoholic or the addict couldn't hear. So I began just practicing, and we talked this over and over and over. Okay, if I'm an under-earner, means if I do that, there will be misery. There's no escaping that. And I don't have to under-earn. I don't have to under-earn. I don't have to under-earn. I can be an under-earner, and I don't have to do it. Just like someone could be an alcoholic, and they don't have to do it. It's like, wow. That began to
percolate,
vibrate, percolate, and I began to actually hear. You mean I don't have to do this? You mean there's something that could happen? And it took me, in really difficult confrontation, I would say about a year from being able to admit that I was an under-earner, and the baby was born, and we were running out of money, and this was real. This was like shooting with real bullets. And we did all kinds of things that I wouldn't even have time to say all. But we drew up a contract, setting up consequences. I began to discover... You
and your wife did this?
Yeah. It's like, how much would be enough? I never knew what was enough. Enough was going to be when I bought the mansion in the Hamptons. But as it turned out, enough was like somewhat just under $1,000. This was quite a while ago.
I think this is one of such a key issue, is most of us live in a kind of vague picture of what's enough, or a vague idea about what we need.
Specifically vague. We call it a terminal vagueness.
Yeah, and it really just keeps you stuck, because there's no clarity, there's nothing to aim for, there's no reality to it. So you can live in the fantasy, whatever fantasy you're living out. So the idea of a contract really sounds very powerful.
And it's very clarifying. So it's like, okay, if I don't make enough, then here's what we're going to do. In that case, she was going to go visit her family, which would not be a vacation. And if I didn't make enough the next week, then she was going to stay there, which would definitely not be a vacation. And if I didn't make, and we go right down to, well, supposing a few years go by and I become this hopeless case that never, okay, we'll let you get a divorce. Now neither of us wanted a divorce, but it's like, if we say, okay, let's just think the thing through.
I think it's brilliant. Because who wants to talk about that? Most people would rather live in hope. And hope is kind of hopeless in a sense. It doesn't take you anywhere. It could be a starting point, but yeah.
They say when hope dies, hopelessness dies. And I think that's exactly what happened for us. And so all of a sudden we set a date, and I can say it was like, the last week of February, somewhere around 22 years ago, because that boy is now 21 going on 22. And we knew how much was enough. It was very well defined. And I had to make it. And, she used to cover, but she was not working because she's being a mother.
Right.
So, she couldn't make the difference. She couldn't protect me. She couldn't do anything. So I had to,
step up to the plate.
Yeah, I took over the checkbook. I mean, many things that we had to look at the way we perpetuated a dysfunctional system. And, I'll just say, it's a very happy story because on that week, for the first time since I'd met her, I could honestly say I made enough money.
Wow.
And the next week I made enough, and the next, and I can, like the next 18 years, each year.
So what's the value of doing it a week at a time? I know in, let's say, Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a day at a time. So what's the value of actually choosing to deal with it a week at a time? Or
well, I just because say people think you got your paychecks a week at a time, it's just a measurable unit. Could have been done a month, but it was much more, oh, wait a minute. And I began thinking I knew how many appointments I needed a week. I began tuning into what
it would take.
Yeah, what it would exactly take. And I would almost say, as soon as I could truly say and be with all those elements, it began happening. And it didn't happen like then I figured it out. I always kind of knew, although I had to let go the mansion in the Hamptons fantasy and the, also let go of the despondency. You're like, no, come on, like here, this is it. Something real is possible, and I can, accomplish that. And I say, you can say, well, I did pick up the phone and I did call some numbers, but you know what? Also, the phone began to ring. And, I always say, like, I don't bother to explain my miracles too much because, I think it's more useful to realize there are miracles. You say, when you get committed, then providence opens itself up and things begin to happen that they were not happening.
I want to ask you about the compulsive aspect of it, because people can explain under-earning on an individual basis, circumstantially, but there's something you're talking about that's really underneath that causes compulsive under-earning.
Yeah.
So say something about that.
Well, that's another thing that we need to examine. So we usually think, we think like we're thinking, and we think we're the thinker, and, that we kind of live a life at the level of those thoughts. But this is just like, like when people are on a diet, they've been on the diet all day, and then at the end of the day, just when they get done congratulating themselves, they go to the cupboard and get the box of cereal or go get the ice cream or whatever they're going to do. Something, and I'm just going to speak of it as like something instinctual, something animalistic, something willful and compulsive, right, at a much deeper level than those thoughts that we live in, is operating us, and it guides us, and it's much brighter than we are, and it's got access to everything we know plus. So, we're really no match on a, one-on-one, we're not going to just think our way through this and overdo it. This is really going to humble our I think of it now as our, ego self.
Sure, a vision of who we think we are.
Yeah. But I know with all the mortgage crises going on, the banking crises, the unrest, and the simple fact that it really doesn't matter how much you make. I know this now from speaking to millionaires who were definitely suffering from under-earning, that because it's not a matter of fact. Like myself, I always imagine talking to some guy in Afghanistan about my poverty or, my hard time. I mean, they'd crack up laughing if they didn't just scoff at me.
Or slap you.
Yeah, exactly. So these things aren't literally matters of fact. They're matters of our
underlying
experience.
belief system.
Exactly.
We have about 3 minutes left, and I just want to point to that because what you point to in the conversation about the millionaire who still perceives himself as an under-earner, anybody looking from the outside would go, well, he's insane. But it seems to me that what you're saying is follow the suffering to get access to what's driving the show.
Yeah.
Because if you're a millionaire and you're still suffering and feeling in survival mode and scarcity, then there's something bigger going on than the dollars and cents.
Yeah. And it's great. I love when you say follow the suffering, because that's what's going to get us beneath that level of, we think if we put more money in the bank or something like that, we'd be handled, and that will not do it at all. So, to just like, if we could just get it said today, look, some of you have identified with what I said. Some of you might be identifying while saying, I'm glad I'm not like him. Okay. But I've talked to many of you, so I'm kind of like, I'm outed, I'm exposed. I'm like, it's too late for me. But there is a transformation that is a match for the suffering and the bottoming out process. It's very hard on the ego, but when you begin seeing there's a power accessible to you, to me, to us, and I think it's exactly the power we need in the world today to face what's ahead of us. We don't need to become clever. If I just finally made myself do the right thing and was very successful, and I'd become one more, arrogant. I'm already arrogant enough, but but just
yes.
That wouldn't. But I've been able to serve many, many, many people just through sharing what I and my wife and the things we learned about relationship, about love, about family, about human being, is I wouldn't trade it for any. It's a richness beyond measure.
Yeah, and we've got about 60 seconds left. I think one of the most powerful things I hear is this whole idea of just being willing to take a look, of being willing to fess up, even if only to yourself, to start to own it, instead of beating it to a pulp, because inevitably it will surface again, because it is what's running the show. And until you can distinguish it, you don't have access to it.
Exactly like that. Much more will be revealed. If you begin finding out that, you do identify, let me just say, you're really not one of the few, you're just one of the first that's beginning to admit it. And truly, much, 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 much more will be revealed to many, many, many more of us.
Great.
And
thank you so much.
Great to be here again, Natasha.
I am Natasha Sherman, and this has been Talk to Me. Thank you for joining us.